Okay, so now we've had the Spanish-American War, and we are the proud possessors of two new territories, Guam and Puerto Rico. Cuba has its independence, but we're going to put some strings on that, and we have to deal with. So this is a political cartoon showing Theodore Roosevelt saying, "I rather like that imported affair." And he is loving the imperialism crown. So John Hay, as we said before, he's Secretary of State, and he said that the Spanish-American War was a splendid little war. But remember, with the four news, we had new problems. And so, as the Philadelphia Inquirer cautioned, with peace will come new responsibilities which must be met. We have colonies to look after and develop. So this is something that we're still talking about today. How involved should we be in other countries? The Philippine War. Now this is kind of sad. The Spanish-American War is over. But Emilio Alguinado had been a revolutionary leader in the Philippines, and he had been fighting against the Spanish. So enter General Arthur MacArthur, and General Arthur MacArthur is, he's the father of Douglas MacArthur. He is going to be sent to the Philippines. He helps rid the Philippines of the Spanish, but now he's there, and we decide that the Philippines aren't quite ready for. We end up fighting the Filipinos, and this war ended up with 4,300 Americans killed and over 50,000 Filipinos. We did not treat the Filipinos very well right after the Spanish-American War. Instead of negotiating, instead of accepting their pleas for independence, we decided to take over the Philippines. So this is what our overseas possessions look like by 1900. We've got Hawaii, we've got Midway, we've got the islands here. We have our first one, American Samoa. We have Guam as a result of the Spanish-American War, and we have control of the Philippines. We also have Puerto Rico over here, and we're actually going to have economic and political control of Cuba. So this battle begins between the anti-imperialist and the imperialist. Is this in the American interest? Is this the way we should be?
European nations had long established imperial colonies. The British in India, the French in Indochina, the Spanish in the Pacific and the Caribbean. In the 19th century, they turned their attention to Africa, carving it up. Eventually, only Liberia and Ethiopia were left as independent countries. Russia had even crossed the Bering Strait and established a foothold on the North American continent. It was in this competitive climate that the United States found itself. There were citizens who believed that if the U.S. did not join the land rush, it would lose out. What was the interest in expansion? There were three reasons. The most important was economic. During the Civil War, the U.S. had greatly increased its production of manufactured products, dictating a desire to find new markets abroad and a need for more raw materials. The second reason was military strength. Some believed that if the U.S. lacked powerful armed forces, it would not be able to defend its economic interests. The third reason was the belief in the racial superiority of Anglo-Saxons, white people of English descent, especially the British and their American cousins. In the late 1800s, many British and Americans believed it was the white race's God-given duty to civilize and Christianize the so-called inferior peoples of the world. British writer Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden, appeared in McClure's magazine, romanticizing this idea.
Take up the white man's burden, send for the best ye breed. Go, bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught, sullen peoples, half devil and half child.
The expansionist philosophy was far from universal. A group of educators, writers, and social activists who called themselves anti-imperialists opposed expansion. They believed that imperialism was a threat to the American value system, that a democracy should not keep other countries in servitude. Activist Jane Addams castigated Kipling.
To protect the weak has always been the excuse of the ruler and tax gatherer, the chief, the king, the baron, and now at last of the white man.
The anti-imperialists also highlighted practical issues, the huge cost of maintaining Army and Navy, and the fear that expansion would take jobs away from U.S. workers. The late 19th century saw three particularly key expansionist events that set an imperialist mood for the 20th century.
So, some very famous anti-imperialists you see here, Andrew Carnegie and Mark Twain. Mark Twain was quite vocally against us expanding into nations where we really weren't. These were some of these arguments. Mark Twain says, "We do not intend to free, but to subjugate the people of the Philippines. We have gone there to conquer, not to redeem." William Jennings Bryan faceably says, "In the forcible annexation of the Philippines, our nation neither adds to its strength nor secures broader opportunities for the American people." So these two were very expansion. When you look at this political cartoon, it's hard to read, but it says, "Republicanism down to date. Don't be afraid, Mac. It won't make major," I can't even read that myself. Okay. But you can see here's imperialism on the cannon. This is Russia and England. You've got France back here. Now you've got Uncle Sam walking up the hill. You've got, if you look very closely, the Statue of Liberty. This is very much an anti-imperialist cartoon, saying that this is, we're using violence and this is not the way to go. However, when you look at the economy, imports and exports, you can see they are growing and growing and growing. Our exports go to 2.8 billion by 1914. So, that was again one of the 4 news on new markets and trade. We are going to have military forces in Cuba till about 1902. And we actually do some very, very good things. The Spanish had been very oppressive, and we're going to build infrastructure, we're going to improve roads. And this was the fellow that was in charge, General Leonard Wood, and he really did a good job in the 4 years that he was there. And so when the military forces leave, we actually leave Cuba in much better shape than Cuba becomes what is called a protectorate of the United States. And basically, we are controlling Cuba. We're going to control it economically and politically, and we also say that we will protect it from any foreign interference. How do we do that? We do that with something called the Plat Amendment, and these are U.S. amendments to Cuba's new constitution. And this is what the Plat Amendment. It said Cuba couldn't sign any treaties. It said that the United States could intervene in any affairs that Cuba got into, domestic or foreign. It says that the United States gets control of Guantanamo Bay, and we still have that to this day. That's where we keep all the bad guys. And it says Cuba can't overspend. There are no deficits. We didn't want Cuba to be in a position where it had debt.